It is great to be with you. If you weren't here yesterday, or even if yesterday just seems like a long time ago, remember we're looking at the book of Deuteronomy. It's a sermon preached by Moses on a hilltop, a bit like that, looking over the promised land, the kind of green and lush land. After 40 years in the wilderness, Moses preaches before he dies. So yesterday we saw that Moses, in the first 11 chapters of his sermon, reminds the people to mistrust themselves, to trust God, to listen to his word, for he is the God who said, I will be your God, you'll be my people. I've loved you, I've chosen you, I've poured out my grace on you, now put me first. So that's what I said yesterday. I took a little longer to say it, but you're now up to speed. This morning, first up, we're looking at Deuteronomy 12 to 26, so let's pray again as we look at God's word together. Father, we ask that you would speak to us as you've promised through your word, that we might see more clearly who you are and what you've done for us in the Lord Jesus, and might be moved and equipped to live gladly for you. For we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. If you really want to annoy me, just say, isn't the Old Testament just a bunch of rules? Nothing could be further from the truth. The Old Testament is a soaring, breathtaking, grace-saturated, tear-jerking, heartwarming revelation of God and an anticipation of everything that God gives us in the Lord Jesus. Until we come to Deuteronomy 12 to 26, which is basically a bunch of rules. This morning we're looking at the biggest collection of rules in the whole Bible. And that means most of us, to be honest, don't really know what to do with these chapters. In fact, I wonder how many well-intentioned plans to read right through the Bible in order have been derailed here in these chapters in Deuteronomy, even if you've managed to make it through Leviticus. So where does all the confusion come from? Well, first, it comes from the fact that when we read these rules in the Bible, we don't know what we're dealing with. When we hear the English word law, or words like rules or stipulations, we just think restrictions. Law for us is a negative thing. Law cramps our style and tells us to slow down. It makes me think of those evil signs saying things like, please keep off the grass, or even worse, no ball games allowed, no parking. See, in our world, lawmakers tell us what we can and mostly what we can't do. But these chapters in Deuteronomy, like the other chapters in the Bible that we loosely call law, aren't actually called law at all. There's a completely different word in Hebrew for God's description of how we should live. It's a Hebrew word that's hard to translate, but you might have heard it before. It's the word Torah, or instruction. But Torah is God's instruction on how to live a beautiful life. Torah is positive and freeing and expansive and even exciting. And grasping this positivity is the key to understanding Deuteronomy 12 to 26. For Moses doesn't just list a whole pile of rules of stuff we can't do. He persuades, he cajoles, he motivates, he goes for our hearts. He speaks to attract us and move us and to show us something about how people like us can live a beautiful life with God here and now and ultimately forever. Now, when you get that, it does explain some slightly puzzling things about the Old Testament. You ever wondered about what David says in Psalm 19, for example? Here's what he says from Psalm 19, verse 7. The Torah of Yahweh is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of Yahweh is sure, making wise the simple. Then he says this, more to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Torah is sweeter than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. He's not saying, oh, rules, rules. I love rules. Give me more rules. These restrictions just glow and make me feel warm on the inside. I mean, could you imagine anyone saying that? Does anyone normal ever rave about laws? But David raves about God's instruction, his Torah, his picture of the beautiful life. David says that all God has done for us and said to us to enable us to live with him and for him is a truly beautiful thing. It's marvelous. Now, in fact, I don't really think it's pushing it to say that you could well translate the word Torah, not law, but gospel here. It's so overwhelmingly positive. David says, "How I love this beautiful description of the life God wants to give us." So in the Old Testament, Torah is something to get excited about. And getting this positivity is the key to reading Deuteronomy 12 to 26. Okay. So we don't really know what we're dealing with. Second thing is, though, we don't really know how to read this Torah. Okay, Deuteronomy 12 to 26 is so long that reading these chapters actually feels like very hard work. And even if you glance at your English Bible, you know, the editors that the publishers have kind of given the job of putting little paragraph headings all the way through, that, you know, they're not part of Scripture, but they're just trying to help us read. They usually run out of steam when they get to about Deuteronomy chapter 22. They go okay up to that point, but if you glance through later on, you'll see they have to resort to such helpful headings as various laws, more laws, miscellaneous laws, more miscellaneous laws. I mean, the guys have to make a living, so we shouldn't be too hard on them. But it's like saying, we don't really know what to do with this bit. Now, Moses helps us, when we actually read Deuteronomy, to read these chapters properly. I don't know if you noticed yesterday, I didn't say very much at all about Deuteronomy 5. Back in Deuteronomy 5, Moses repeats the 10 commandments, or the 10 words, as he calls them, pretty much word for word from Exodus 20. Now, in the context of Deuteronomy, it's really important. And the key to what Moses is doing in this sermon is finding what looks like a pretty uninteresting phrase, the laws and the statutes. It's just one of the ways Moses refers to the Torah. Now, if you look with me right back in 4 verse 1, when he introduces us to the talking God, speaking on Mount Horeb, Moses says, "Here are the laws and the statutes." But the problem is he doesn't actually give us any laws and statutes. We get to the start of chapter 5, he says it again. "Here are the laws and the statutes." He repeats the 10 commandments. But then at the start of chapter 6, he says, "These are the laws and the statutes." He does it again in chapter 8, verse 1, and 11, verse 1. It's his way of saying, hold on, there are more to come. I've got more to say about how you live for God in this land than the 10 words God gave you back at the beginning on Mount Horeb. Said laws and statutes, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming until you get to chapter 12, and then we get an avalanche of them. Now, what Moses' point is actually fairly simple, okay? What happened when God said 10 words back on the mountain is intimately connected with the mountain of words he's about to download in chapters 12 to 26. You see, the 10 words, the 10 commandments given on Horeb, are a great pocket guide on how to live for God for recently escaped slaves from Egypt who are about to walk down the road to Canaan. They're really like the contents page of God's beautiful life. But they're just the beginning. They're not the conclusion of all that God has to say. Okay, we've got these escaped slaves. Let's give them a quick guide of how to get going as God's people. 10 words, bang, 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 bang. Now they're on the edge of the land. They'll need more than that to live in Canaan. He said you're going to need more than 10 bullet points. In fact, quite a lot more. So in chapters 12 to 26 of Deuteronomy, Moses takes those 10 words and applies them to life in Canaan in all kinds of ways. He's not trying to be exhaustive, but in a dynamic and fresh and faithful way, he describes what the beautiful life Mark II is going to look like. Okay? So the 10 commandments are like the index, the contents page. 12 to 26 is the full text. Now, it may help you to think of these chapters as a huge painting, one in which every brushstroke is meticulously applied, but it really only makes sense when you stand back and kind of look at the whole picture, because it's a picture of how God wants his people to live with him in the land. And as he paints that picture for us, it's actually an anticipation of the beautiful life which Jesus himself will come to live and then will enable us to live. Now, as I said yesterday with chapters 5 to 11, there is no substitute for sitting down and letting all of chapters 12 to 26 wash over us in their entirety, letting the scale and the scope and the detail of the beautiful life wash over us. But if we get the fact that this is a grand picture of this life, then we're well on the way to reading it properly. And then there's one more thing that we often forget. We forget that in the Old Testament, Torah, this picture of the beautiful life, really is prophetic. Now, I honestly don't know how clear Moses' audience sitting on the dirt on that hilltop were on this, but we can be clear on the fact that all that God is saying to us here in these chapters is ultimately pointing to something. It's like an enormous billboard or signpost. It gives us a picture, even a scent of something that is yet to be. A beautiful life which will be embodied and brought within our reach by the Lord Jesus. We touched on this yesterday, but hear these well-known words from Matthew 5:17. Don't think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I haven't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the Torah, the law, until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, a couple of important things to notice there. Jesus says that he has come to fulfill the law. That word does not mean to bring it to an end or get rid of it. Jesus comes to bring the Torah to fruition, even to embody it. Has it ever struck you as very weird that Jesus says that the Torah will somehow remain unchanged until the new creation? That's what he says. Do you notice that rather awkwardly, Jesus says we actually have to do and teach every bit of the Torah? And then the really annoying one, he says we have to be more righteous than the Pharisees. Now, I don't think he's talking about justification by faith there. He's actually saying we need to live a better life than the Pharisees. Now, that actually fits with everything else that we read in the Sermon on the Mount. If you read through these chapters, you'll see that Jesus keeps saying, you've heard it said, do this. But I tell you, do this. His issue with the Pharisees isn't that they take their faith too seriously. His issue with them is that they have minimized the beautiful life down to keeping a few rules. Jesus says it's bigger and brighter and more beautiful than that. I don't know if you realize, but the pattern of these laws in the Old Testament, it starts with the 10 words, the 10 commandments. And then straight after in Exodus 21 to 24, it gets filled out a bit. You get 3.5 chapters more rules. You get to Leviticus. You get to Deuteronomy 12 to 26. And when the Lord Jesus comes, he actually blows it way beyond that. He said, the life that I have come to bring you affects every single dimension of your existence. It's about loving God with your heart, with your soul, with your mind, with your strength. And he said, not only do I come to call you to live this beautiful life, I'm going to do it, and then in the power of the Spirit, I'm going to invite you to follow in my steps. I think that's what he means when he's talking on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning myself. All this must be fulfilled. He opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. Thus it's written that the Christ should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead. According to Jesus, all this is in the Torah, and Jesus understands these chapters as pointing forward to him as they ultimately describe his beautiful resurrection life. So as we dive into these chapters, remember they are Torah, they're God's instruction for the beautiful life, they're an expansive application of the bullet points of the Ten Commandments that ultimately give us a sweeping picture which anticipates Jesus' resurrection life, which he holds out to us. And in the few minutes we've got left now in this session, we're going to gaze at this beautiful life. As Moses says, when you go in there, here's how you should live for God all day, every day. Now, let me just point out three things to start with that dominate this collection to give us an orientation. The first thing Moses says is the beautiful life is dominated by God-shaped worship. One of the basic principles of living the beautiful life is established right at the beginning. Here's what Moses says from 12 verse 2. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. Verse 4, you shall not worship Yahweh your God in that way. But you shall seek the place that Yahweh your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name, make his habitation there. There you shall go. There you shall bring your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the contribution that you present, your vow offerings, your freewill offerings, the firstborn of your herd and your flock. There you shall eat before Yahweh your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which Yahweh your God has blessed you. Verse 8, you shall not do according to all that we're doing here today, everyone doing whatever's right in his own eyes, for you haven't as yet come to the rest and the inheritance that Yahweh is giving you. And Moses goes on and on like that all through chapters 12 and 13. His point, when we go in there, he says, worship God his way. God is God. He's in charge. He tells us how to live for him, not the other way around. It's not even our job to work out what offerings to bring or how to please God. God tells us how to do it, where to do it, and enables us to get on with it. Now, this actually takes us to the heart of why idolatry is so attractive, both in the Old Testament and for us. The real God, the God of Deuteronomy, the God of the Bible, is extremely definite and demanding. Worshipping a God substitute is so much easier. You can put anything in God's place and it'll be easier than God, because God's substitutes are less demanding. They're more manageable. They allow more room for self-indulgence. You can fit them into your schedule and lifestyle. A God like that allows us a bit of room to indulge ourselves, seems much more attractive much of the time than a God who says, you must worship. You must live my way. And the problem is that our sinful muscle memory, our natural default, is to take the easiest option, the one that seems most fun and least costly. But God says it won't do. We are to worship God alone. As we've been singing, our only hope in life and death is Christ alone. And that explains why God is so insistent that we do things his way. That's why Moses repeatedly uses the phrase, the place that Yahweh your God will choose. He doesn't even tell them up front where to pitch the tent, where God's presence was, where to build the temple. Moses says, God will tell you where to do that. He'll make the call. He'll be calling all the shots. And that was to be the case for the entire life of God's people in the land, right down to what they can and can't eat. Why? Well, chapter 14, verse 2 explains. You're a people holy to Yahweh your God, and Yahweh has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. What follows is a list of animals, birds, marine life and insects which can and cannot be eaten. Now, there might be dietary benefits from some of this stuff. I mean, I cannot imagine that eating bat could ever be good for you in any way, but that's not the reason behind the list. God gives them a menu to make sure that they and the people who follow will remember that they belong to Him and worship Him His way. So don't waste time trying to work out why you can't eat cormorant. That's not the point. The point is, every time you sit down, God has set the menu so it reminds you that you're a people holy to Yahweh your God and you live His way. It's a God-given, God-designed system with a message. God sets the agenda for us. Now, remember that the people sitting in front of Moses as he takes them through this Torah have been living a very simple life in the wilderness for the past 40 years. Their routine was not complicated. Get up in the morning, gather manna, eat manna, pack up tents, walk in desert, stop, unpack tents, eat more manna, sleep, and repeat. Now they're on the edge of a land flowing with milk and honey. Suddenly, endless possibilities open up before them. They could do absolutely anything. And God says, make sure you do things my way. Keep me at the center. Make sure you worship me in my way. Now, in many ways, things are very different for us. Jesus himself gloriously tore up the menu when he says it's what comes out of us that makes us unclean, not what goes in. As God's people scattered around the world, we don't all gather at one place chosen by God 3 times a year. But the New Testament makes it really clear that we have been called as God's holy people to live His way, to live a beautiful life in Christ. And wherever we are, whatever situation we find ourselves in, however culture changes, we need to stay focused on our responsibility to live God's way. Here's how Peter spells out our responsibilities, picking up the very language we've just read from Deuteronomy. You're a chosen race, 1 Peter 2, verse 9, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Once you were not a people, now you're God's people. Once you had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. So, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Peter says, we are God's people who belong to God. It is God's right. It is His delight to tell us what to do and how to do it. What is that? Proclaim the excellencies and the beauties of God and keep our lives pure as a holy people, both when we're together and when we're scattered. So Moses starts by talking about God-shaped worship. Then he majors on God-centered community. Now for Moses, the land that the Israelites were about to enter would give them effectively a taste of Eden. From the beginning, God had shown He was committed to bringing His people back into a relationship with Him. That included giving them a place to enjoy life with Him. And that's actually why the land is so important in the Old Testament. The land is the place where you get to enjoy a relationship with God. That's why to deprive someone of their bit of land was to mess with their relationship with God. Now, I've got to say, my next-door neighbor, Andrew, took advantage of me being away for the weekend to move his fence a meter towards our house. I wouldn't be overly delighted when I got home, but I wouldn't feel, oh, Andrew has messed with my relationship with God. But if I'm an Israelite, my little bit of land was given to me, to my family, by God, for us to enjoy life with God in this physical place. which is why Moses focuses so much on being a God-centered community. Because to be God-centered is to make sure that enjoying a relationship with God is what makes everything function. So that's why 15 verse 7, he says things like this. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart and you say, the 7th year, the year of release when debts are cancelled, is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother and you give him nothing, and he cry out to Yahweh against you and you be guilty of sin. Give to him freely. Your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. They were in the land together to enjoy God together. If one of your brothers is suffering, is poor, and it interrupts his enjoyment with God, you've got to do something about it, because the whole point of your community is to know and serve God together. That's why community life was to be punctuated by everybody getting together to celebrate God's goodness. 3 times a year, everybody comes to Jerusalem for a great feast. It was kind of like Christmas 3 times a year. Did you notice back in chapter 12? What are you to do when you go to the place chosen by God where his presence is? You get to eat and you get to rejoice. That's to be right at the heart of the nation. You'll see the same, 16:13. You shall keep the Feast of Booths 7 days. When you've gathered in all the produce from your threshing floor and your winepress, you shall rejoice in your feast. You, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the Levite who didn't have any land of his own, the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow who are within your towns, everybody. For 7 days you shall keep the feast to Yahweh your God at the place which Yahweh will choose, because Yahweh your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. Just think of that. 3 times a year, the whole nation traipses to Jerusalem. Everybody gets together so that they're all together joyful. That God is for them, he is with them, and that life with him is a beautiful life which is rich and good. And it's to be enjoyed together in community. I think today in Australia we really need to continually ask, is inclusiveness a mark of our churches? Are we genuinely welcoming families? Perhaps surprisingly, this was to be the heartbeat of God's people, according to Moses, in the land. Every Israelite, including those who've no land of their own, those who've been left alone as widows or orphans, non-Israelites who've settled in Israel, those who are just passing through, everybody's welcome. Because ultimately, this is God's community. He's at the center. And everyone is swept up in the delight of enjoying life with him. See, it really is a very attractive community. Now, I think that's really obvious in the guidelines in Deuteronomy 17 for Israel's king, should they ever choose to have one. Now, I just love this chapter because the king in Deuteronomy 17 is basically a complete unking-like king. Read with me from Deuteronomy 17, verse 14. When you come to the land that Yahweh is giving you, you say, I'll set a king over me, like all the nations who are around me. Okay, that's fair enough. You may indeed set a king over you, whom Yahweh your God will choose. Remember, this is God's community. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who's not your brother. Then this, only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since Yahweh has said to you, you shall never go back to Egypt. He shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver or gold. When he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, this Torah, approved by the priests. It shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahweh by keeping all the words of this law, these statutes, and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Now, do you see what the king is not allowed to do? The king is not allowed to throw his weight around. The king is not allowed to get rich. And the king is not allowed to build an army. But what is the king to do? The king is to copy out Deuteronomy and to spend all day reading it and doing it as an example for the people. The king is to be just like everybody else, only more godly, essentially. And do you notice the little phrase about the heart? The two things the king has to be really careful about: that his heart isn't lifted above his brothers, and his heart's not turned aside to worship idols. I suspect that's exactly what Samuel is talking about when God is looking for a man after God's own heart. This is what the king is to be like. Why? Because this is to be a God-centered community, not a hierarchical one. Now, at the end of a tricky passage in 1 Corinthians 14, Paul describes the ideal outcome when a visitor walks into church. If an unbeliever or outsider enters, he is convicted by all, he's called to account by all, the secrets of his heart are disclosed, and so falling on his face, he will worship God and declare that God is really among you. That's why being a God-centered community really matters. Because God's ideal for his people from the beginning has always been to display to the world what real life is all about. Here is where we taste real life with our God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Here is where God has given us something that people cannot and will not discover anywhere else. Because this is the life God calls us to. And the third thing that's to mark life in this land is God-honoring relationships. Within this community, every relationship is important. If we had time to read through all these laws, you'd see neighbors matter, justice matters, truth matters, the poor and the vulnerable matters, sexual morality matters. Now, if you read through the barrage of laws that begin in chapter 19, these concerns come thick and fast. Moses covers a huge range of subjects in a scattergun fashion. But at the heart of much that he says is this: God-honoring relationships matter. Psalm 19, verse 14. Don't move your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set in the inheritance that you will hold in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you to possess. Your relationship with your neighbor matters. Verse 15, a single witness won't suffice against a person for any crime or any wrong. Only on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses shall the charge be established. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute will appear before Yahweh, before the priests and the judges. They'll inquire diligently. They'll make sure justice is done. And verse 19, your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Remember, that's basically saying there needs to be fairness, justice, proportionality in every decision. The way people are treated in matters of justice matter because God-honoring relationships matter. Even in chapter 20, where Moses deals with a campaign against the inhabitants of the land, detailed restrictions are put in place for the way that enemies are treated. No scorched earth policy, no cutting down fruit trees, no carte blanche to mount aggressive campaigns once the Canaan War is over. The way in which we treat people matters. Captives matter. Blended families matter. People on your roof matter. Deuteronomy 22, verse 8. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring the guilt of blood upon your house if anyone should fall off your roof. It's not really what you expect to find in the Bible. But everybody matters in this community. On the night before he died, Jesus says these words recorded for us in John 13. A new commandment that I give you, that you love one another. Just as I've loved you, so you're to love one another. By this all people will know that you're my disciples if you have love for each other. And it is a new commandment. No one had ever said it quite like that before. But notice that in loving us perfectly, Jesus has embodied and fulfilled the kind of God-honoring love which was sketched out hundreds of years ahead of time in the Torah of Moses. And when we've seen Jesus, we know what this looks like in the flesh. That Moses' kind of scattergun portrait, almost like as he flings paint at the canvas to try to capture this for us, has now come into sharp focus in a living, breathing human being, God become flesh. And the great news is that Jesus has actually put this kind of God-honoring, selfless love within our grasp. It means if you're a follower of the Lord Jesus, in whom the Spirit of Jesus dwells, it means for us as individuals, as communities of the Lord Jesus, being about people isn't an option. We are called to be a God-honoring community where every single relationship matters. See, in the beautiful life, God-shaped worship matters, God-centered community matters, God-honoring relationship matters. Now, you put all those together, and essentially, we see this is to be a God-saturated life. All the details of life matter. If you read through these laws, Moses ranges far and wide, jumping around all over the place, often in consecutive statements, as he makes sure that the people in front of him and us get the fact that God's existence and love and rescue and promise and provision should have an impact on every detail of life. So he says, you shall not plow with an ox and donkey together. Don't wear clothes made of wool and linen. Make yourself tassels on the four corners of the garment on which you cover yourself. Some of these laws have clear reasons. You know, a concern for fairness to donkeys. Some of a symbolic, a signposting legislation. Why are you to put tassels on the corner of your robe? So that every day you put on your robe and you go, what's that tassel do? Oh yeah, that tassel's there to remind me that we are a people holy to our God. Why mix wool? Why can't you, have, kind of composite fabrics? It's not that, wool is moral and linen is immoral or vice versa. It's because for Israel, they were to do things like that, to go, why don't we wear, a cotton polyester mix? Oh yeah, because we're Israel, the people of God. It was all a signpost. It was to remind them all day, every day. As soon as they woke up in the morning, when they went to work, when they were at home, that the fact that they were God's people transformed everything, including their attitude to sexual relations and personal hygiene and what they wore. Because everything in life is swept up in the fact that we are the people of our God. You see, these laws really are a picture of and a call to live a God-saturated life. Moses sums it all up in the chapter we read at the start. Chapter 26, very end of the collection, Moses holds back a couple of rituals because they capture everything that God invites us to and how he asks us to respond. I just love that passage we read from Deuteronomy 26, 1 to 11. What are they to do when they get into the land? Well, they take some of the first fruits that are produced, which they harvest, put it in a basket, go to the place that's chosen, and what are they to say? Verse 3. I declare today to Yahweh our God that I've come into the land that Yahweh swore to our fathers to give it. You shall make response before the Lord. Verse 5. A wandering Aramean, Jacob was my father. He went down to Egypt. Instead, there we became a great nation. God rescued us, verse 7, when we cried to him. He brought us out of Egypt. He brought us to this place. God has done all this for us. What do we do? Verse 10, now I bring you the first fruit of the ground which you, O Yahweh, have given me. The first fruit is a token of the whole box and dice. Said, I'm going to live every second of every day for you, my God and King. And the result, verse 11, where we started in chapter 12. You shall rejoice in all the good that Yahweh your God has given to you and to your house, you and the Levite and everybody else who's there. You see, it's a beautiful life, a life of gratitude, a life of confession, a life of faith, a life of obedience. The collection ends with these words, verse 16. This day Yahweh your God commands you to do all these statutes and rules. Be careful to do them with all your heart, with all your soul. You've declared today that Yahweh is your God. You'll walk in his ways, keep his statutes, commandments, rules. You'll listen to his voice and obey it. And Yahweh has declared today that you're a people for his treasured possession as he's promised you, and you're to keep all his commandments, and that he will set you in praise and in fame and honor high above all nations that he's made, and that you shall be a people holy to Yahweh your God as he has promised. It really is quite a stunning picture of the life that God calls us to as his people. Living this life is an all-embracing, all-consuming, all-in thing. This is life to the full, as Jesus described in John 10 and 11. This is what Paul's talking about at the start of Romans 12. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is the only kind of worship that makes any sense. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what's the will of God, what's good and acceptable and perfect. I hope you could see why these slightly unpromising chapters of Deuteronomy matter. This is a picture of the beautiful life. This is why God rescues his people from Egypt. This is the life that God holds up to the nations in the Old Testament. And in the Lord Jesus Christ, this is the life that God invites us to. Israel, God's people, are just about the most audacious visual aid in all history. Here is a living, breathing, working model of what it's like to live a beautiful life full of God-shaped worship and God-centered community and God-honoring relationships. A God-saturated life. Moses says, here's what the beautiful life's going to look like in there in ancient Canaan. Now, of course, the problem is that Israel's life was anything but beautiful for almost all of their existence. They were supposed to go in there and live like this so that the Moabites and the Edomites and the Ammonites and all the other ites were supposed to look and go, boy, life is good in there. But they didn't pull that off. Rather than attracting people to Yahweh, they dragged Yahweh's name through the mud. Rather than being a light to the nations, they plunged themselves into darkness. Until, as Isaiah tells us, one day that people stumbling around in darkness saw a great light. Someone stepped into history who was full of grace and truth. In the words of Luke, who grew up radiating wisdom and attracting everyone whom he met. Someone who put flesh on this beautiful life. See, Jesus came and embodied this Torah. He lived and breathed this beautiful life. And when he showed up, the scaffolding, the signpost that was the ancient nation of Israel fell away to reveal the beauty behind all that God had been doing and saying as Jesus appeared in all his glory. See, when he came, the signage was no longer needed because he's the one who not only lived holiness, but provided it. Here's one who said, not just you need to offer sacrifice, he became the sacrifice. He didn't just tell us to obey in all the details of life. He did it for us and then enables us to follow in his steps as he stepped out of the tomb in his resurrection body. Jesus once explained the significance of what he'd come to do to a woman called Martha like this. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. When Jesus says he is the resurrection and the life, he doesn't just mean that death won't be the end for us. He's saying that in him, he invites us to this beautiful life which starts now and goes on forever. This is ultimately the message of his death and resurrection. Jesus died and rose that together we might start living this life now and then enjoy it forever in his glorious presence for all eternity. So given the fact that's what Jesus has done for us, this is what we're called to, what should we do? It's actually not complicated. Brothers and sisters, let's follow him wholeheartedly. Let's throw ourselves together into living this beautiful life in him and with him and for him. Because that's what he invites us to do. Let's pray together. Loving Father, we ask that you'd help us to take in the scope and the beauty and the attractiveness of what it means to live with and for you. And we thank you for that precious relief that you don't just give us a list of stuff to do and tell us to get on with it, but that Jesus Christ himself became one of us and lived a beautiful life and then died to pay the penalty for our failure to do that and rose again and poured out the Spirit and even now intercedes for us that we might follow in his beautiful steps. In your mercy, help us to take hold of this by faith and to throw ourselves into living with and for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.